Okay, this is the second part to the portrait drawing tutorial for my Art 1 class. Um, Last time we did this underdrawing, which looks kind of like a robot, and we talked about the different proportions of the head that are pretty much the same for every human. So we talked about the eye line, the nose line, the mouth line, etc. So now we're going to draw over top of this underdrawing. I'm going to switch to a darker drawing tool so that you guys will be able to see what I'm doing. But at this point, as you are drawing, you should go ahead and use a light pencil still. So I'm only using a darker tool so that you can differentiate between my underdrawing and the marks I'm going to add now. So in truth, you are going to be keeping very few of these actual marks that you've made so far. A lot of these will be erased. So we'll talk about that more as we're going along. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw based on this photo. So I'm going to pretend that this is me, and so this is going to be my self-portrait. For you guys, you can choose to truly do this as a self-portrait and look in the mirror or look at your own photo. Or if you'd like, you can go ahead and draw this lovely model. And I am going to work on the male model this time around. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to start with the eyes again. So as we're doing this, the key, as always, is to really look. All right, so one of the big things is that we want to observe some of the angles that are within the eye. All right, so, and notice too, as I begin to draw, I'm actually not going to necessarily start at the top of the eye here. I'm going to use this as the placeholder for this entire part of the eye. So if I am starting with sort of the white part of the eye, the opening of the eye, I'm actually going to start that down here. And notice, as I do that, I'm actually using angles. I'm using straight eye lines and angles. So I can soften these up a little bit as I go, but if I start these with straighter lines, it's going to be more accurate. Now I'm going to do the tear duct. Okay, so notice how this is a separate shape sticking out beyond here. So again, just like we did at the very beginning of the semester, we can more accurately see what we want to draw sometimes by actually outlining it. So if that helps you, you could do that as you go. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close in this part of the tear duct. And I'm going to add the eyelid. Now, some people have a tendency to want to connect this to the line that we just did, but in fact, they don't connect over here. So I'm going to start this up a little bit higher. And again, I'm going to look for those straight lines and angles. So notice this isn't a perfect curve over what I did. I'm also observing how much space there is between here and here. So if this person had narrower eyelids, I would draw them narrower. If they had heavier eyelids, like they were sleepy, I would draw the eyelids larger. So if you're drawing yourself, you can draw your eye more how you see it. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my iris. So that is a circle, but it's not going to be a full circle because part of it is going to be covered by the eyelid. But notice the bottom part is not as covered or not covered at all. So see here, you can actually see a little bit of white space here. And here, this is pretty much just like sitting along that bottom or maybe a tiny bit covered, but it's much more covered up here. So what's happening with the eyeball is that we have this whole white part of the eyeball is embedded in the skull, and then the eyelid wraps around something like that. All right. And then over here, that's where you actually get the tear duct. So it's something like that. All right, so now I'm going to add the pupil. We can't actually see the pupil very well in this person's eye because his eye is so dark. I'm going to attempt to scroll down a little bit on my page if my OneNote notebook will cooperate, which, there we go. So if you look at this person, her eyes are lighter, so you can really differentiate better between the pupil and the iris. So the pupil being the black part, and then the iris being this kind of green or hazel part in her eye. All right, so I can just draw that as another circle. And then notice how you can really see a number of highlights in his eye. So you always want to draw at least one highlight in the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that to show where there would be another highlight. But these highlights can be any place. So I could add another one over here, for example. He's got a whole bunch of them in his eye. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add kind of a line up here. Now, if I wanted to, we could even start shading a little bit at this point. So what I would do is I would actually shade in this eyelid a little bit darker. So that's going to be just essentially a thick line. You could extend it out a little bit. Notice it's going to have kind of this triangular shape here. And that's going to start to be the beginning of the lashes where they attach to the top of the lid. So if you are wanting to make this a guy and you don't want to exaggerate the lashes very much, you might even just kind of basically leave them as they are. But of course, as we can see on this model, male or female, their lashes might be in actuality more pronounced. But we'll get to that a little bit later. We're not getting to all of the details all at once. We're going to start with more general things at first. Okay. So that's going to do pretty well for most of the eye. I can also then underneath here do a little bit of this bottom part of the lid. So that would be like this right here, where we can see just a little bit of that lid distinction. Up here, you can also see a little bit of distinction of the rim of the lid. So we can also add that in. So I'm actually going to put mine in here. You may, on the other hand, do it below. It just depends on exactly how you drew these to begin with. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to erase that just a little bit. And notice this is not super, super perfect, and that's fine. Okay, so I know we've been doing a lot with craftsmanship, but a human face is not a perfect geometric form and things will not be perfect. So while we do want to have good craftsmanship, we don't have to be super, super uptight when we're doing portraits. All right, so that's basically our eye. Now we'll go ahead and we'll work on the other eye a little bit. Oops. Before coming back and working on some of these spaces that are going to surround the eye, such as the nose and the eyebrow. All right, so now we'll work on the other eye. And with the other eye, as with all of the face is fairly symmetrical. So these are the same, but they're mirror versions of one another. So in this eye, again, I'm going to start with this part, and notice it's not going to be at the very top. Also notice we've got the two tear ducts pointing at the nose. They're closer to the nose. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to replicate this. And again, I'm not using a perfect curve. I'm looking at angle, 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 let's say. All right, so, and that's going to help us see a little bit more accurately. And then again, I've got that tear duct almost as a little triangle in there. And then this comes up a little bit here and over. Okay. And then again, with the eyelid, I'm not going to make it attach, but I'm also going to see how much space there is. And one thing that can get in the way here is we do have this thick lash, so you kind of have to accommodate for that. So I might at first do this a little bit too low. And then I might have to add more in there later. All right, and again, I'm not going to attach it out here. So, and you can notice too that I am changing things up as I go. Okay, and I also want to erase a little bit. I need to make that a little bit smaller to erase the way I want. Okay, and I don't have to worry that my underdrawing is going away because my underdrawing is going to go away eventually anyway. Okay. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the iris. So again, it is going to go underneath that eyelid up there, and it's going to just sit on the rim down here, or like I said, there's actually a little bit of white space showing in this one. So if I want to, I can really have that. And notice too that these eyes are not identical. That's something, and you can really see that actually in the fact that this model has that white space showing on this eye, but not on this eye. And I think that's really actually nice and really important to see because sometimes students freak out about making the two eyes look identical. And the truth is that no one's face is actually perfect. So if they're not identical, you should not freak out about it. If there are differences that are too extreme, then you want to, of course, fix those. But that doesn't mean erasing the whole eye and starting over. It means kind of saying, oh, well, if I want to shift this over a little bit, you know, I can do that a little bit at a time rather than just erasing everything. Okay. All right, so now I have to draw in the pupil. So again, I'll draw the pupil. And again, I will draw one or more highlights. So notice they're in approximately the same places because they are actually reflected light that has the same light source. All right, so, and now I can also make that thicker lash line at the top. And notice it's thicker out away from the eye than it is closer to the eye, just because of the way the lashes grow. So just, you know, the eyes again are sort of mirrors of each other. They're the same, but they're mirroring. They're same but opposite. So the lashes curl, grow from sort of this center and kind of curl outward. Oops, there we go. All right, so there we go. And we can close in this part of the eye here. So we'll close in that tear duct. And, you know, it's not super perfect, but that's okay. I'm going to go back and add more details and shading later. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to work on the nose. So with the nose, I'm basically going to create a line here and here to define the bridge of the nose. So that is basically going to be like this. And so this is going to go pretty much right up to the eyebrows. I can also draw in my eyebrow shape. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that. With the eyebrow shape, you might see a few different things. You're always going to see the main part of the brow and the arch. Sometimes you'll also see sort of an intro to the brow over here, all right? And that may be kind of separate. And they won't always arch this much. So some people's brows are more like that. Some people might have kind of the intro here and then the flat and then the arching back here. So these are kind of all different variations on that basic idea. So this guy does not have really much of an intro, as I like to think about it, but he does have a very extreme arch. He also, his eyebrows are fairly close to his eyelids. So I'm going to actually start this a little bit lower. So you always want to look at sort of these negative spaces. And like I said, this is one of them between the eyelid and the eyebrow. For some people, though, there's going to be a lot more space there. So if I were drawing this woman, not only does she have much larger eyelids, but she also has much more space between her eyelid and her eyebrow. And some of that depends on the person's expression as well. So if they're frowning or concentrating or whatever. So now I'm drawing just this outer shape of the brow. And I'm not actually drawing this. This was just to point out how much negative space there is between the eyelid and the eyebrow. All right, and then I want to notice, where does this arch line up with the eye? And it's going to be right around here. And so there we go. All right, and I can even go ahead and I can shade this in a little bit as I go. Now this is not the hair. All right, so don't get confused with this. The other thing, this is just going to be shading that we're then going to add hair on top of later. But we can also, we don't want to have a super duper heavy outline on the brow, because just like a shadow is not a hard edge shape, an eyebrow is not a hard edge shape either, although this person looks like they are because they've been plucked and groomed pretty significantly. But let's see about this other model. She might have more natural looking eyebrows. Yeah, with hers you can see that it's sort of a fuzzier shape because it's really just the hair. Okay. All right, so there we go. So I'm going to go ahead, since I did the one brow, I'll do the other brow. So again, this brow attaches to the nose. And this brow is even a little bit lower than the one on the other side of his head. So look how close now I'm doing that to, and it really is even a little bit closer. So I just made that come down a little bit. And then notice here, this is, and actually his is even a little farther over here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw what I see. Okay, and notice I didn't erase the line that I didn't like before. I just added, so you can then erase it later if you'd like. But in truth, we're actually going to cover that up with some shading anyway. I am, even though these are not the hairs, I am drawing them in the direction that the actual hair is growing, so we can kind of notice that right now, that generally speaking, the hair of the eyebrow goes like this and then angles over and then down. So even if I'm just shading it, I do tend to kind of follow that, but that is not going to be the final hair. That is just going to be the base shading So I don't have, and notice here again, I'm just erasing that outline. So I don't have, in this drawing app, I don't have a blending tool of any kind. The closest I have to a blending tool is maybe this, if I make this really big. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this is going to be kind of a gray. So this is, right now, what I'm attempting to show you is what I would actually be doing right now would be blending. So you can get out your tissue and you can blend if you've shaded these. And if you have shaded them really dark and you're drawing yourself and you don't have particularly dark eyebrows, then you can lighten that up a little bit as well. Okay, so I'm just approximating a little bit of that. And I'm gonna blend a little bit more. There we go. Here I'm using, this is my attempt to show blending via the digital tool. So, okay. Now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to continue drawing the nose. So I'd already done this top part of the nose. Okay, up here and up here. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom of the nose and I'm going to define the ball of the nose and the nostrils. So I'm going to start here. So down here, this part of the nose tends to be kind of a flat line. So this is going to be right here at the very bottom of that ball that we drew. And then it's going to kind of angle up and over. So I'm going to angle up and over. And I'm making this a little bit exaggerated with kind of angles because I don't want you guys to get it too curvy, which tends to look a little bit odd. All right, so there we go with that. Then I am going to go ahead and draw in between here a little line. So I did this line, I did this and this. Okay, and now I'm doing this, and this is just going to show kind of the plane of the nose where if I put my finger to this part of the nose, I can feel that it's angling back. And then if I put my finger on this part of the nose, that pops out a little bit more. And then if I put my finger on this top part of the nose, you might even feel it flatten out as if you had like a little shelf or table. Some people won't have that as much, just depending on the shape of your nose. Some people have kind of more of a smooth line there. But right here, that's just going to be a little line to show this plane change, all right? And later on, we're going to shade there. All right. The other thing, too, that I'm going to add here, I'm going to add just a little bit of a line, a suggested line here and here, and that's going to be here and here. Okay, so this is, we call this the ball of the nose, and it is kind of ball-like. So it's kind of like this. It could also, sometimes I also draw this as a box for some people, or not for some people, for my Art 1 classes. So I might say, hey, remember when we did our box drawings? That's actually going to be just like this. Okay, so you could think about it like that, or you can think about it more like the ball we did. It's not exactly either, but it's kind of, it's a little bit rounded. It's a little bit boxy. See how this highlight is right here, this kind of, that top part of the highlight, you can kind of see this would be like defining that front plane, then the top plane of the box where it's actually going back a little bit. If you put your finger in your nose right there, kind of where it flattens out. But we don't have to do all of that. We can just do, remember earlier I did this line, and you can do those two lines. And I'm not even going to draw this one right now. All right, so, but I've got this line and I've got these two lines, okay? And now back here, I'm going to draw kind of angling down, angling around, and that's it. I'm not going to connect it. All right, so I'm going to do that over here. Okay, so I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. And now, and notice I'm not attaching this line to this. I'm going to kind of go out an angle in, an angle in, and maybe a little bit up, but again, I'm not going to attach them. Okay, so same thing over here. I'm not attaching them. So I'm basically doing a curve, but I'm doing it kind of in a little series of angled lines, and I'm not attaching anything at the bottom. Okay. Now I can start to add a little bit and maybe curve a little bit. So I'm going to also add here just a little bit to this. And this is what I'm really drawing here as an ellipse. Oops. And you see right here, if we look at this opening of the nose is basically an ellipse. So if you tilt your head back and you look up into your nose, those are kind of roughly rounded shapes. So from a side view like this, they're kind of ellipses. All right. And we don't really want to draw all of these things really strongly attaching here again. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of some of this underdrawing. Okay. So you can also get rid of some of this underdrawing down here. So notice I did not use any of those lines exactly. What I did do was use them as like placeholders or guidelines. Now, as I've got all that stuff going away, now this is kind of what I've got. Now I am going to add a little bit of shading to this. Okay, so again, all I have are, pretty crude tools here. So I'm going to change to a different tool here and see how that goes. But I'm going to add just a little bit of subtle shading in here. So I'm not going to make this a really dark pronounced line. I am just starting to shade a little bit and notice what the direction of my shading is. Okay, I can also do this underneath here a little bit. I'm also going to, and I'm going to switch to my slightly darker drawing tool here. I can shade into here a little bit, but you don't want to make these nostril openings really wide and really all shaded in. If you really look at your nostril opening, it tends to be more shaded up here at the top and then less as you go down. Now the contrast on this guy's face is in that photo is pretty high. I can't see a lot of detail here either, but if you're really looking in a mirror, a lot of times you will see a little bit of reflected light even in that nostril. So don't go too crazy with that. I'm going to erase this. That was not anything you should add. That was just kind of a close-up of what not to do with the nostril. Okay. So I am continuing to shade a little bit. So I could go ahead under here. I could add a little bit of light shading, and notice I'm using hatching, and so you could use some very light hatching and then blend it, and what you really want is to kind of stay with this plane. Okay, so this kind of almost flat but a little bit curving in there. I can also, as I'm starting to shade, I'm also going to make these angles a little bit curvier as I start to shade. Okay, so, and I can continue to do that a little bit. So remember, we shaded that ball. So in a similar way, I'm going to shade this. Now it's not a perfectly round ball, so with the ball, we were trying to make that really almost, just super smooth and perfect. Here it's not perfectly round. All right, so it's actually good if you don't make it perfectly round. Depending on the person's nose too, you may see even like a cleft nose in here or underneath here. So if you see kind of slightly different shadows going on, you can draw what you see there. The other area where you're actually going to see some shading, so I'm going to switch my tool here, underneath here. So you don't want this to be as dark as the opening of the nostril, but this bottom part of the nostril can also be a little bit darker there. All right, so there's more light hitting up here on the nostril, but then this part is darker at the bottom of the nostril. So again, the top parts tend to be a little lighter, the bottom parts tend to be a little bit darker. And then I can go back in here and maybe just a little bit darker. So see how I'm getting a range of value. So this will look a little bit smoother as you're using your pencil rather than this digital drawing tool. Okay, now up here, I am going to also do a little bit of shading, but I don't want to go overboard. So I can shade this. This is kind of like our cylinder or something like that. So I can shade along here a little bit. I could even shade a little bit like that if I wanted to, okay? I could also think about this as kind of box-like as well. But we've got kind of this happening at each side. All right, so I can shade a little bit along this nose. Now what I am going to do now at this point, I'm going to start to erase some of that underdrawing. So you don't want to do too much shading without erasing some of the underdrawing. Okay, so I'm also going to erase some of the underdrawing in here and in here. But remember, we did actually have this and this. And we can also now at this point notice how there are sort of these wings that almost attach. Remember, we had this line. Notice here how there's kind of these wings here that you can kind of see in the shading. So rather than getting rid of this line completely, start here at the center of your nose along that eye line and just create a little bit of that shading. And then I can get rid of this part here. And here, I don't want a really, really heavy line here, but I might actually add just a little bit of shading there. So that's going to help give us this shading that's happening on this side plane of the nose. So the overall nose is almost like this shape. Something like that. All right, so we are just shading a little bit here, just a little bit. All right, and the same over here as well. So I can add kind of that shading here, get rid of a little bit here. And I don't want this to be a really, really hard line, but that's often a really great place to create a little bit of shading. And that's where this side plane of the nose meets the cheek right here. So right now, touch your face right here and you can feel the side plane of the nose then flattening out into the cheek. So here, it's still the nose and it's going back, and then here it flattens out into the cheek. So you can touch that on your own face to kind of see what I'm talking about. So I don't want these to look like lines anymore, but I can replace those with a little bit of shading. So just very subtle. So see how I am using a little bit of darker, these little bit of darker lines here to show these areas that are more like lines versus these areas here where it's just going to be really, really just the side of the pencil, just a little bit of shading. All right, and I can go back in here too and clean this up if it's a little bit rough, if it's still looking a little bit kind of boxy. I can go back in there. Oops. I can go back in there and clean that up a little bit. It's looking a little bit boxy, but I'm not making it perfect curves either. And notice how the two sides of the nose aren't even exactly perfect. Okay, and I'm just smoothing up some of these lines a little bit. But again, if they're not completely perfect, this is, this isn't a box with really precise kind of edges. This is a human nose, so it might look a little bit different. Okay. All right. So at this point, I'm going to go back to the larger view, and I've got my basic shape of my eyes, my nose, the basic shape with a little bit of shading, not too much shading in the eyes, but a little bit of shading in the eyebrows, but we haven't really talked about the hair too much. But we are going to go and move on now to the basic shape of the lips. All right, so with the lips, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with kind of a ball up at the top part of the lips and two larger balls down here. All right, so we're kind of making like a little bit of a pyramid, and this is going to correspond to here. So see how this front part of his lip sticks out a little bit more, and then so does this bottom part of his lip. This is why we're starting with these balls. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to make a little bit of a dip here. So this is going to be this little dip. So this might cut into your circle a little bit. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of outline this part of the lip. And again, it's not going to be necessarily just one smooth curve. If I'm looking at this person, it might do this and this a little bit. If I'm looking at another person, that angle might be a little bit different. So with her, it would be like this and then this. And with him, those angles were a little bit different. So you can draw whatever it is you see when you're looking in the mirror, or if you're drawing this model while you're looking at this model. Okay, now I'm going to erase these lines in here. Now you're not erasing yours, but I just want you to be able to see the reference clearly. So here, now I'm going to draw in this line. So notice here, I started in the center. It's another kind of V-like angle, angling up a little more, and then starting to angle down. And then a little bit up maybe at the corners to make the person look like they're not really angry. So we've got our V, and again, you can follow the line that you see as you're looking at this reference photo. And notice I'm not making this super perfect. It's kind of very scratchy right now. That's okay. Okay. And now I'm going to finish this off with this line connecting these two circles that we made earlier. And then that's going to create kind of a flat bottom, and then angle up and out, an angle up and out. And here, this is an area where people often get a little bit freaked out. Notice there's not like one really heavy solid line. There's kind of a line here, and then kind of here, and then kind of here, and then kind of here. So there's like all of these different lines of these different areas of lighter and darker areas of like pigment, but then also highlights and shadows that kind of define the lips. So if you try to give it one really heavy line, it might end up looking a little bit fake. So just keep that in mind, that the lines that you use, all the lines we're using at this point should still be fairly light, except for some of these areas maybe where we started to shade a little bit. Especially with this edge of the lip, it's never going to be like one really defined line. I'm also noticing here that I've made this bottom lip maybe a little bit too narrow, so I'm going to move this down and out just a little bit because my model has like a very full bottom lip. All right, so and notice I added, and then I can go back and erase if I need to erase. Although sometimes that extra line can just kind of define, give you more shadows. All right, so now speaking of shadows, I can get rid of some of my underdrawing, but I don't necessarily want to forget about that completely because I actually am going to kind of use that to shade. So I'm erasing this, but you might not want to erase it completely. Like when you're drawing in pencil, you're going to see that anyway. I'm going to get rid of some of these underdrawing lines I don't need. All right, but I am going to go ahead and I am going to just kind of replace them with kind of some shading lines. So I'm going to use this to show kind of my shading. So I'm shading kind of around these circles, and notice I'm starting here at the bottom of this circle. So I'm almost shading underneath the circles here. All right, and then I'm also shading up here at the top of the circles. So notice these marks that I'm making here. I'll actually make them a little bit, I'll make them in this darker one. So I'm actually shading them in the direction as if they were circles. And that is what we started out with. So I'm shading kind of at the bottom or underneath the two circles. And then I can keep going. And again, I don't need like a really heavy solid edge on the bottom of this, so that's fine. Okay. And I can, and I will also then go ahead and I'm going to use this tool a little bit to kind of show, okay, but now I would blend that shading a little bit more. And again, notice there's shading at the top part of this lip and at the bottom part of this lip, but not necessarily very much in the middle. So see how we've got that really bright highlight? We're going to leave that part because that's going to make that appear to be puffing out a little bit. So again, it's going to make it feel more 3D. So again, that kind of thing we learned when we were shading, when we started shading, about areas that you want to make appear, go back in space, shade those darker. And then again, to kind of create this kind of blended look the best I can here, I'm going to blend a little bit with this eraser tool. So the equivalent for you guys might be using your folded up paper towel or tissue. Okay, so, but we don't want to blend so much we get rid of all of these edges and all of this. So don't overblend. Okay, so now I'm going to go to here again. All right, and I've got this top ball. So again, I'm going to shade that really like a ball. Now I got rid of this very top part here because remember that kind of went outside of my lip line. All right, so I don't want to keep going above this part, but I'm going to shade this top part of the lip just where it is, and then I'm definitely going to shade this bottom part, and I'm going to leave this part lighter, okay? So something like that. So if I were shading it on here, that's creating this part of the center part of the lip popping out just a little bit more than this part over here and over here where it's actually angling back and wrapping around the front part of the face. So here I can do that shading here along this top part a little bit. And notice again, I don't have to have this like super defined edge because the lips don't have a super hard defined edge, okay, kind of more like a shadow, and then up from here. So again, this center part of the mouth where it opens, that's going to be like the darkest part. And I'm noticing here too, well, we'll do that in a little bit. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So something like that. I can do this a little bit more. Okay, and then I kind of want to blend it. So on here, I'm going to do that with some of these different tools. But again, you would be using your blending tool. But notice I'm not blending this way between the top and the bottom over the center line. The top lip is one form and the bottom lip is one form. So I'm not trying to blend them into each other. Okay, just the same way you didn't blend past the edge of the box because that would just make your box look like it was kind of disappearing and fuzzy. Okay, and I'm gonna finish up so again, this is all I'm just trying to do. I would just be using my tool, your blending tool for this. Okay, and now you've blended a little bit, but I can also go back and I can add more texture if I need to. So I already have quite a bit of texture here, but if you've blended away all of your texture, notice how the lips actually have quite a bit of texture. That's just what lips look like. And this is kind of the direction that texture goes. All right. So on this person, it's even more pronounced. So here, it's almost a straight line, and then it's doing this. So it's a lot like the lines on a globe. So the lines on a globe would be flat, and then like this. That's very much what you're getting with the lip texture. Okay, so if I want to make my lip texture stand out a little bit more, then I can go. Now you don't want it to look super even. If your lip texture, if all of these lines look like stripes that were like manufactured and like on your striped shirt, that's not good. Notice how these are slightly different widths apart. And even as you're adding those, you might even want to almost kind of draw around some of these highlights, just like we did earlier to form the highlights on the eye. So I could even outline them and then shade around that to make sure that I don't lose those highlights. And as I'm doing that, again, I can keep noticing, well, how is this texture going? So again, the key is to really look. So you don't want to just say, okay, well, I'm drawing texture lines now because Mrs. Brand told me to. No, I really want to see what are the exact lines I'm drawing. So we started out with the bigger forms, but as we go on, we can add more and more detail to this. Okay, now we haven't done all of those details. Notice here, as I'm doing that too, I might notice, hey, this side has a little more shadow. So again, that's just going to be dependent on what I see. All right, so I'm drawing that if I see that. Okay, so we have done a pretty good amount of detail in the lips. We've done some detail and shading in the nose, and we've really just done the basics of the eyes. So I am going to go back now and I'm going to add a little bit more to the eyes. So I'm going to shade in the iris of the eye. And one of the things to notice here, I'm actually going to make the top part of the iris. So I'm looking at the different model now. But the top part of the iris is darker than the bottom part of the iris because the top part of the iris is shadowed more by that upper lid. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm also going to use more of this shading tool here. So I'm going to shade so you can block in the value a little bit. And then you could even use your blending tool on this a little bit. All right, I'm also going to use this darker one here to shade in the pupil. So I've got the iris is typically lighter and the pupil is typically darker. Now that may not be very noticeable if your eyes are very, very dark or the subject of your portrait has very, very dark eyes. So like when we were looking at the man in the top, you can probably not even differentiate between the pupil and the iris in this photo at all. So if your subject has very, very dark eyes, you can make them almost the exact same shade, although it might be nice to even exaggerate and make them a little bit different just for artistic license. But you can make that very, very dark. So at this point now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, again, try to approximate that blending a little bit. So I'm going to try to blend a little bit here. Blend away some of my earlier rough parts. And that's something that's really important, that a lot of the mistakes that you made earlier, you can kind of blend away at this point. Or shade away, I should say. So you could shade and fix them. So if you need to erase a poorly drawn edge of something, so I could erase there and then use my shading to go back in and fix that. So that kind of thing. And notice I'm still keeping my highlight there. Okay. Now another place too, I'm going to add some shading is actually in the white of the eye. So I'm going to get rid of this underdrawing. So you should also get rid of some of this underdrawing. You don't want to see later on this eye line cutting through the eye. All right, so you don't want to see these lines. So make sure, if you haven't already done so, you get rid of some of these extra parts you don't need. And so I'll do that over here too. All right. Now I'm actually going to add some shading. So I'm going to start with this darker tool so you can see what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep it very thin. I'm actually going to shade this. Remember when we talked about that eye being a ball in the skull? So again, how did we shade a ball? Well, we shaded it kind of like this, right? With circular marks. And if this were the highlight up here, we kind of left that circle and we shaded around it. Okay. So in a similar way, I don't actually want you to draw a a ball up on the forehead, so I'm going to get rid of that. But in a similar way, we are going to actually shade this sphere, and it's going to be shaded the most in the corners, and then sort of toward the top where the eyelid is going over it. And again, I can fix other little details as I'm doing this, so I'm doing that a little bit. I'm going to shade around here. I'm definitely going to shade in that tear duct. So notice how the tear duct, both because of the pigment and the shadow, is definitely darker than the white of the eye. All right, but you see on this person's white of the eye, you can definitely see the shadows as well. So I'm shading inside the tear duct. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this other digital drawing tool. So again, but the idea is that I'm blending this. You don't want to have, for the sake of letting you see it, I kind of did it more with hatching so you could see the directionality of that. But now I want to kind of blend it and smooth it. So, and if it's gotten too dark, you can use your actual eraser, and I can use this kind of blending digital eraser, and that actually helps blend. So don't worry if you are drawing a little bit and then erasing a little bit. That's totally normal. Okay, now other places I also need to shade are going to be along the lid. So this part of the lid here goes back into the head more, so it's very, very dark. So I'm going to shade along that line. So this is a place that does look more like a line, but it's because it's a sharp crease. Okay, so I'm going to shade a little bit above it, and I'm going to shade onto the eyelid. So I'm going to shade below that crease, and I'm going to shade along here by the lashes. The only part that's going to be less shaded will be sort of the center of that. So see how this is actually catching a highlight? So this center part doesn't have to be as shaded because again, it's kind of cylindrical. So this part going up here is going back in space, and this part is going back in space, but this part here might be catching the light because it's rounded. So I can now, I'm going to use my other tool to kind of show how, okay, will really be a little more blended. All right, but we are using shading and just a little bit lighter towards that center part. And I can add a little bit of shading up here too. And as I look at that eye, you might start to say, there's actually quite a bit of shading in that eyelid area between the brow. Okay, so depending on the person, you might have a lot of that area shaded. Okay. And maybe even over here a little bit. So again, and it's going to look a little bit different on different people. So you could be looking at yourself and seeing. Okay, now, and you don't want to go too overboard. You don't want to make these marks too messy. So again, I can blend a little bit. So you can use your blending tool. Mine is not going to look perfectly blended, but that does kind of mimic what you might be doing if your lines are not perfectly blended, then they better have been going the right direction, right? They don't want to be going all over the place. They want to be following the form. Okay, so that's starting to come together pretty well. I'm going to get rid of this line down here. I don't need that line anymore. I don't need this line anymore. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm not getting rid of all of my underdrawing lines though. So I just got rid of this one. I can get rid of this one. All right, I can start to get rid of this one underneath the nose. But notice I'm not getting rid of this one over here. All right, I can get rid of this one, but I'm not getting rid of this one on the side plane of the face. Okay, so I'm keeping that one still. So I still have quite a bit that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to stop there. So next tutorial, some of the things that I'm going to be covering are, I'm going to be shading this eye, okay? I'm going to be doing underneath the nose We're going to be going back and doing more with the brows. And we're going to be shading more of the rest of the face, giving the ears more detail, shading the chin, the neck. So we'll be adding a lot to this. There's one more part that we haven't really done yet on the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and approach the lashes on the eye before we finish this off. And the lashes can be really tricky because they do appear to go straight up, because they are in some places, because they are kind of curving to the side and up. And so if they are coming out at you, that is going to appear to be kind of up. But if you draw them straight up like that, they do tend to look very, very odd. So you will find some tutorials online saying, hey, just draw them straight up like this. But generally they look a little odd. So I'm gonna recommend drawing, if you're drawing them at all, drawing them more out to the side and curving up. So, and then maybe stopping about halfway. So I'll make these a little bit bigger so you can see them better. So something like this. But again, if they're too pronounced and too individual, they do tend to look a little bit odd. So see how here they make much more of kind of a mass. And so that's why we did start them out as that black line. So you can, if you've started them out as a heavy black line, then you can just add a little bit more texture to that. But see how I'm not doing boom, 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 boom here? That would look a little odd. If I need to go back, I can go back and erase into them a little bit to create a little bit more texture. So a lot of this, again, we're just kind of going back and forth and back and forth. If I've erased too much, I might have to add more blending on top of that there. All right. If you do see any kind of texture in the iris as well, and if you have a lighter eye, you might see some texture in the iris. So I'm going to look at this one. Again, you want to make sure you've blended the iris first. So I'm blending, blending, blending. Okay, I'm kind of making this neater, but it's only after I blend that then, and shade this and blend it, that then I might say, okay, maybe I am going to see a little bit of texture. And you don't want to overdo it and make it super, super dark on here with the texture, but you might see a little bit of texture in the eye there. So you might see some texture like so. But you don't want to make them look like spokes in a wheel. If you get too heavy-handed with it, they will look like spokes in a wheel and it'll just be too much. So other things in here, other details. So again, depending on the person, you might be able to see, some lighter areas here on this inner part of the lid, and then getting darker. So again, just like I'm kind of using the eraser and then the drawing tool, you might be using the eraser and then redrawing as you're going to create some of these little details. Okay, so on here, while I'm using this digital tool so you can see more clearly what I'm doing on my screen, you can do the equivalent by erasing and drawing with your pencil as well. And you always want to be thinking about the forms. So as I'm kind of fixing these different little parts, I'm thinking about, okay, this form of the lid is coming in front of this iris. So I need to make sure it looks like that instead of the other way around. So I'm trying to make that iris look like it's coming in front and catching the light. All right. And then I did the lashes up top, so I can add a few lashes on the bottom. I probably don't want to make them super dark and heavy, but I can kind of have them do this kind of curve. So if I want to make them a little bit darker, just so you can see them a little more clearly, they're doing this. So they're coming up and out like so. And I don't want to go too heavy-handed. If I do every single one, it's going to look overboard when I look at that whole the whole portrait. So I'm going to zoom out so you're looking at the inside view. Now I could also potentially be drawing more of this down here, so I can add a little bit more to that shading that I see. Again, depending on the person. And again, notice how I'm making this lighter. If I make this super, super heavy as say up here, then it's going to make that person look very, very old. It'll be unflattering. So if you add a detail and it doesn't look right, try lightening it up. And you might find that it's just, you've made it too dark. And that's the only thing that's going to be a little bit off about it. Okay, and so even with this now, I can continue to kind of soften up different things where I'm seeing, you know, my digital sketch might be a little bit wonky in different places. I'm just going back and I'm just erasing some of these things and I'm just reworking and reworking. And that's the big thing, you know, about kind of getting your art to the next level. It's about, okay, well, how long are you willing to spend fixing something that doesn't look quite right, comparing it to the reference photo and figuring out, okay, what is off about that thing? You know, is this eyelash a little bit thicker? Is the eyelid a little bit bigger? Is the eyebrow a little bit lower? So there are a lot of those different things. All right, so like I said, next time we will pick up with adding some more detail to this in some different places. So we've got underneath the nose, we've got that area to still work on. So I'm just going to circle some of the places that we still need to do. We still have to kind of fix the brows up here. We still have, obviously, the ears. We haven't done this eye. You know, the brows still need a lot of work. We're going to erase a lot of these underdrawings by the brows and around the eyes and that kind of thing. We're going to do a lot more detail down here with the chin and shading around the sides of the face. All right. So, but that's, we got a lot done today with eyes, nose, mouth, adding some detail and even some shading.